Well, let's we're already 2 minutes late. So let's get started. So happy Monday, ladies, and what a great way to kick off the new year by chatting with TJ, Tori. I hope that's not a secret that your name is Tori. Okay. Newman about falling. Before we get started, as always, a few quick thank yous. To Jennifer Crowley, of course, who is my moderator and does so much work for this group. Thanks to all of you moms who are joining us tonight and have read the novel or have recommended it to friends. And thank you to those that are perhaps joining us after the fact who couldn't join live and are going to watch our recording on YouTube. And last but not least, of course, thank you, Tori, for joining us tonight and chatting with us. So let me give you a little bit of background if you don't know about Tori. She is a former bookseller turned flight attendant. She worked for Virgin America and Alaska Airlines from 2011 to 2021. She wrote Falling on cross-country red-eye flights while her passengers were asleep. I love that. And she currently lives in Phoenix, Arizona, as we were just chatting about, and Falling is her debut novel. So, Tori, we always kind of like to start with a little bit about your path that led you to becoming a writer. We obviously, know you were a flight attendant, but did you always have aspirations of writing? Can you just talk a little bit about how we are here today?
Sure, yeah. Hello, everybody. Also, hi, thank you for having me on. This is very, very cool. As I was gushing about the whole thing, it's neat to be a part of this. The short answer to your question of did I always want to be a writer is yes. The longer, more full and realistic answer is that it was not a short path to get there. I was a flight attendant before I was a writer, and before I was a flight attendant, I was a bookseller, and before I was a bookseller, I was in New York pursuing a career with, my dream of being on Broadway. I studied musical theater in college, and then I moved to New York. And seeing as we're not discussing what show I'm in, I think it should be fairly obvious that was not super successful. And by not super successful, I mean, I failed miserably, nonstop. And so after facing a lot of failure and a lot of closed doors, I left and I moved back to Phoenix, which is where I'm from. And I'm then, like the mid-20s kid living back with their parents going, what am I going to do with my life? That didn't work out. I'm a failure. What do I do? And that's when I got a job at Changing Hands Bookstore, which is a local indie bookstore here in Phoenix. And I fell in love, and I re-fell in love. I should say that's not like I grew up being a reader and a writer, and that's that part where I said, I've always wanted to, I've always dreamed of it, but it was my time working in the bookstore that everything went from kind of just being a dream that I wanted to do to a concrete goal. And part of the reason is that I realized with writing, I could still be creative without the risk of failing in front of people. That was one of the main reasons why I started writing, was because I could just do it for myself. When I went to New York and tried to pursue my dream there, it was very public. All my friends and my family knew, and it was just out there that this is what I was doing. And so when people ask you constantly, oh, what shows are you in? What are you doing? And every time your answer is just kind of embarrassing and sheepishly like not much of anything. Getting back into writing was my way to still be creative and still use my imagination and just be the creative person that I was privately for myself. And I left. See, this is what I was talking about. I gave you a short answer. This is the long one. I'll try to wrap it.
It's all good.
I'll speed it up. But so my mom was a flight attendant and my sister was a flight attendant, and I sort of knew how the gig worked, and I knew the benefits of the job, and I knew I would love the job. And when the opportunity to get on with Virgin America came up, I took it. So I left the bookstore, I went to be a flight attendant, and it was there that sort of all of the weird, winding, circular, dead-end paths kind of converged into where I am now.
It's amazing. So I kind of normally would ask this question towards the end, but I feel like since your path was not easy to get this amazing book published. If you didn't notice in the acknowledgments, I think you had to present this book to over 40 editors before, ultimately, I think you ended up with Shane Salerno. So talk a little bit about, because we do have a lot of aspiring writers in the group, a little bit about any advice you might have for them, whether it be, just writing in general or steps to, kind of find an editor, and a little bit about that journey and your perseverance, because I'm not sure everybody would stick it out after maybe 20.
And I was very close many times to being one of those people that didn't stick it out past the 20, all the way through 41 to get to my 42nd agent submission. That was my one and only yes. It was hard. And I do think that, my first time when I was in New York, where I failed so miserably, it helped thicken my hide. My skin grew pretty thick because of that. But I think I also realized that it never gets easy. Like, people always say, like, how'd you keep going? It's like, I don't know, because I felt every single one of those rejections. I'll tell you, I felt every single one of those rejections. And the way that I kept myself going was I just kept telling myself that I didn't come this far just to come this far. And I knew I would always regret it if I didn't keep going, because I would always be going, what if number 27 was the one? What if number 33 was the one? And it turned out 42 was the one. So I'm so glad that I kept going. And to anybody out there that is working on their own stuff who also has dreams like this, I think I've said keep going probably like 10 times at this point, because that's the best piece of advice that I can give, is just keep going. And that's from moment one, from, the first sentence that you write up until the point that somebody says, yes, let's actually do this. Let's publish this. And it's interesting because I'm right now working on my next book, and it's been so fascinating to see that the process of convincing yourself to keep going doesn't really stop. Like, I still feel doubtful. I still feel hesitant. I still feel insecure and feel like it's not good. And I think I'm just finally starting to maybe learn to accept that maybe that doesn't ever go away. And so when you're like just starting out, you're thinking, well, if I just hit this, if I just did this, well, I did it. I have a book, and it's, was a New York Times bestseller. Like, I've hit the marks, and I'm still going, but what if, and this isn't, and doubting and questioning. So I think that maybe never goes away. So the lesson in that is like, just keep going, just keep going.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes the doubt probably pushes you to be better. I think if you, had too much confidence or even become complacent, then that's a problem too. And sometimes that's evident in people's writing, I think. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. And to that point, like I queried 41 agents. I also wrote over 30 some drafts. So it wasn't like I wrote down one thing and was like, it's good. Now I'm just going to keep pounding on doors until it's ready, until somebody, says yes. I was tweaking and I was working on things. And I think some of that humility of knowing, like, okay, if I am getting told no, is there's maybe a good chance that, it's not them but me. So let me look at what I'm doing. And I did keep tweaking. And that's, you got to find your inner voice where you trust yourself and then trust the voices around you, and you get there over time.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that's great advice. All right, so let's dive into the book. I'm going to start with some questions where I think we can avoid from spoilers. And then when I get to some questions where I know spoilers are going to be talked about, I'm going to announce that, because then if people haven't finished this book, I don't know how you could possibly pick this book up and not be done with it, because I read it in one sitting. So, but just in case there are some people that haven't finished the book, I'll announce when we're going to talk about spoilers. So clearly you had the professional expertise to write a novel involving an airplane and flight attendants and pilots, but did you draw on personal experiences or events relayed to you by coworkers, or was this kind of just truly all up here and kind of pulled it out of your imagination?
All of the above. And luckily, the the events that take place in the book have never happened to me or anyone that I know. There's not, it's definitely, I mean, it is a work of fiction. The entire thing is fiction. All of the characters, all the situations are complete figments of my imagination. That being said, the tools in front of me, the materials that I had were from a decade of flying and a decade of being coworkers with friends, sitting in the back alley, sharing stories and talking. So while all of it is completely fictitious, it is painted by a decade's worth of experience.
Yeah. Fiction based on fact.
Sure. There you go.
So for me, the book I felt I was captured chapter 1, kind of sentence 1, and you did such an amazing job, almost like, okay, buckle those seats, it's time to take off, and here we go. Like literally, I felt like, the plane was taking off and I was on this wild ride. Did that kind of, the first chapter, did that come easy? Or was that something you kind of really had to work on? And as you were fine tuning things, was that particularly a chapter that you spent some time on? Because it really did. I mean, you felt like you were taking off right away.
That's music to my ears because that was the desired effect, and it came easy once I realized that's what needed to be done. But the first chapter, which is the prologue, basically, it was one of the final pieces to fall into place. It was one of the last things that I wrote, actually, because I couldn't quite nail down the opening. And I realized as time went on that part of the problem was the stakes weren't set. You didn't understand what exactly was at stake here. So I decided to just introduce it of like, this is what's at risk here. These are the people, this is the situation. And if something does go sideways, this is where you're at. It can get this bad this easily. So it was a nice way to sort of set the tone of where it could go and then immediately bring it back to, the next chapter, which opens just in a suburban neighborhood with a woman making a bed and kids eating breakfast and just a very, more of what we are used to every single day. So I felt like I needed to add that. But it was a late addition to why I realized why the opening just wasn't really working. And the first sentence also, I mean, the opening line of a book is just so important and it's hard to do. And I probably wrote an opening line, every draft had a different one and there were 5 versions before each draft, because I just couldn't get it right. And when I wrote the opening line, which was when the shoe fell into her lap, the foot was still in it. It was very throwaway. I didn't even think anything of it. And it was only afterwards that I was like, oh, that's actually pretty terrible and horrible and really visual. And a funny thing about that, actually, I'm not good with short answers, by the way. I don't know if
fine. It's good. That's what we're here for.
I always realize halfway through, I'm like, you are rambling, Tori. You are just rambling. Oh Lord. But I was reading a book well after the fact, after the book was published, and I was reading a book on aviation accidents and incidents and investigating them after the fact. And it was a very academic book and it had lots of pictures and lots of academic descriptions of the horrible things that happen in the aftermath of a aviation crash. And I turn the page and there's a picture of a shoe with a foot still attached, with the foot, the opening line of the book. And this sounds really terrible, I know, but I have to say, when I saw that, I was like, yes, yes, okay, which is not a great reaction to seeing something like that. But it felt like you were saying in the first question, it's sort of it's all fiction, but sort of based on a whole lot of fact.
Yeah, for sure. So the backstory for Saman Khani, I guess that's how you would say it, plays obviously an integral part to the why of the novel. How did you research this key piece of the storyline?
How did I research that? The internet is your dear friend. I'm a news junkie. I'm a big news junkie too. I watch a lot of news. I read a lot of news. And I wanted to how do I say too much without giving away too much? I wanted to base the antagonist storyline in empathy. And I wanted the antagonist to not be the stereotypical terrorists that we're used to. And I wanted it to be a different look. You know, these are not our enemies. These are our friends. These are our allies who we betrayed. And I was interested at looking at the consequences of a betrayal on our part and what that could look like.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Okay, so at this point in the chat, we may have some spoilers because they're just unavoidable. So as a frequent business traveler myself, because my day job pre-COVID required a ton of travel, I guess self-questioned the lack of security for the crew that enabled the gun to be on board, as well as the gas canisters. Is this a real concern, or did you take some creative license here?
The easy answer is creative license.
Okay,
There are
that makes me feel better.
Yeah, you should not read this book and be scared. I do not believe it. You know, there's several things that I took liberties with for dramatic purposes, and also to protect we call it SSI, but basically secure information within the aviation industry that is not public knowledge and is not put out there. There are protocols in place, there are safeguards in place that ensure that aviation is safe, and it is. And I feel like I get asked oftentimes, you know, it's putting this idea out there, or you know, why would you put this idea out there? And to that, I always say, I'm a flight attendant with a big imagination, and that's it. And I guarantee you, if I can come up with this idea, the people who spend every day devoting their lives to make sure that we are safe in the sky, they've already thought of this. They've already troubleshooted this. They're well ahead of a flight attendant with a big imagination.
Yeah, I don't think you're planting any seeds. There's plenty of media out there with plane hijacking. So, so talk about the role the gas played in the plot line, because in theory, you really didn't necessarily need the gas, right? Because it could have just crashed the plane. But was it a way for Sam and Ben to kind of control Bill and Joe to some extent? I guess, you know, ultimately Joe as well. They didn't know at the time that Joe was involved, but
I didn't get that. Oops. Could you try again?
There's my watch talking to me.
Sorry's in the chat. That's nice.
So yeah, just talk about, you know, the gas component, I guess, of it, and what your thought process was there.
Yeah. Interesting. Actually, nobody's ever asked about that specifically in the way that you just phrased it. So I went with that for several reasons. One being it was important for the antagonists to have that kind of poetic justice for what their families endured and what they were basically wanting to create a retaliation for. So that was one reason for that. Another was, frankly, I really wanted to figure out a way to get the flight attendants and the passengers involved. I did not want it to be a story where there was a problem up front and one man had to solve it. I wanted it to be something that involved everybody, and that really sort of hammered home the point that I, as a flight attendant, always realized was, and that I feel like is so easy to not realize if you're just a passenger, not just a passenger, but if you're just going from point A to point B, your mind isn't usually thinking about the fact that, look, if something goes sideways up here, it's us. It's us. It's just us.
Yeah.
It is the passengers and the flight attendants inside this plane and the tools that we have at our disposal. And that's it. And I find it fascinating and interesting as a flight attendant. And I think that it's been really fun to sort of see the public response to that, that I think it sort of changed the perspective that a lot of people have when they get on a plane, when they do fly, and that's fun.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. That's that. I like that. That's why I involved it. And kind of, just the approach that they took, that they're a team really. And there was a lot of question, I think, was it always going to be Ben that was the other, who had infiltrated the plane? I think some people maybe initially suspected it was Kelly, or maybe it was going to be a passenger. But I kind of loved that, he was in the cockpit with Bill, and that everybody outside ultimately was working, to help Bill. Although probably would have been interesting if he was in the plane, or if they were on the plane, more engaged. But anyway, so Bill, why do they decide that Bill has to crash the plane? Because in theory, they could have either sent Bill back with the gas, or they could have, because the gun was there. Now, once you revealed the gun, you could have just killed Bill, and then Ben could have crashed the plane. But I think I know what the answer is, but I'd love to hear what your answer is to that.
My answer to that is Bill actually asked that exact question. Why didn't you just shoot me and crash the plane? And the response is because it wasn't about the crash. It was about the choice. And I really wanted to, it was an idea that I found interesting, that I really wanted to wrestle with, and have these characters wrestle with, and have the reader wrestle with, is what choice would you make? Because I think it's very easy, and this goes back to what I was saying about like stereotypical bad guys. It's like, it's very easy just to make someone bad and to say someone did a bad thing. It's far more interesting, I think, to say why, and then to put yourself, you as a reader, as a passenger, as a captain of this plane, Bill, to put you in that position to say, okay, well, if you have no choice, what do you do? What do you choose? And yeah, it would have, sure, you could have just crashed the plane, but all that would have been was a plane crash and a not interesting book. I think it was a far more interesting thing to say for everybody, including the antagonist, to say it's not about that. That's not what this is about. This is about the ethical dilemma that good people, a good person put in this situation, what do they do?
Yeah, and I think if my thought too was that if Ben crashed the plane, then that sort of defeats the whole purpose of why they really did it, and from the get-go, right? I mean, they were trying to send a message to America, and if a Kurd crashes the plane, it's a different message than an American crashing the plane, right?
Right, exactly. And it's also, it was personal. This wasn't just, an arbitrary thing. It was personal for them.
Yeah. So the role that the media plays in the novel is also super important on so many fronts, from kind of, I guess, Americans' apathy, to the plight of the Kurds, all the way to ultimately, the media basically saves them. So like even 10 years ago, I would say that might not have been in the case, because we wouldn't have had the technology for what happens on the plane to have happened. But does your training as a flight attendant now include tapping into these outlets if necessary? Like, I mean, is that possible? Like,
well, what's interesting, I mean, yes, it's completely possible. There's Wi-Fi on the planes, and you can do anything with that. So yeah, technologically speaking, everything is completely possible. And I think the reason that's in the book, and why it's such a prominent part of the book, and why it's also very interesting to see how over time that storyline actually changed quite a bit over the drafts that I had of this story. There actually used to be, in earlier drafts, there was an entire plot line that was from the ground, from the media. It was at like an actual, CNB. It was this media, like a CNN type, TV news network, I was very involved in the storyline. And I think that, so I worked for Virgin America, and we were the first airline post September 11th to sort of bring back a lot of the amenities that had been lost when everything was scaled back after September 11th. And every single one of our planes, every single seat had a TV in it. And at that time, when we became an airline, that didn't exist. Everybody else started adding them in after the fact, but we were sort of the first to do that. So it was this fascinating thing, which at that time was new and was novel and was different and weird. And I have been in situations where I'm flying, working a trip, and I'm doing cart service, and I'm, delivering drinks, and I'm looking at a passenger's TV screen over his shoulder, and there's breaking news and something happens. And like the entire plane, you see the screens all switch to the breaking news. And then you just all stand there and sort of bear witness. So it was something that I was exposed to. And like I said, at the time, that was new and that was interesting and novel and different. And so I think it just naturally became this sort of thing that happened to me that I, experience. I know what it feels like to be watching the Olympics with an entire plane full of people, and to have, everyone erupt, in celebration at the exact moment, or to be watching a horrific event that's happened that everybody is now communally discussing. So all of those things kind of naturally came about from just being in that environment every day.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I love that you included like the social media influencer, because that's, but can be the good power of being a social media influencer, right? I mean,
exactly.
That's our new norm.
Yeah. As a flight attendant, it's always sort of, that's the double edge of the sword. It's like somebody's always recording you, but then like also it's like it can really come to aid you at times too. So it was a positive way to sort of look at that phenomenon that we see now.
Yeah, for sure. So at the conclusion of the novel, both Bill and Carrie are committed to the cause that both Sam and Ben gave their life for. And I think this may have come as a surprise to some readers. Can you talk about the decision to have them both become voices, for the plight of the Kurdish people, as opposed to, maybe taking the view of, hate or, kind of the opposite reaction, I guess.
Sure. I think I wrote the ending as I wrote it because in the way that I wanted the antagonist storyline to be rooted in empathy, I wanted that to maintain also for our main characters. I personally feel like, I don't know, that maybe this is me just soapboxing, but I guess it's my book, so I'm allowed to do that. But I feel like we get in a lot of trouble in the world, and when we don't do the hard thing, which is to not give in to hate or vengeance or any of those sort of low-hanging fruit, and instead say, I'm going to try to be empathetic to this. I'm going to try to look at this from another angle. I'm going to try to approach this from a non-emotional point, and hopefully maybe break a cycle and maybe not perpetuate more of pain and suffering and hate, but maybe compassion and forgiveness and empathy and understanding. And I wrote this book just to have fun. I really just wanted people to have fun and to go on a fun ride. But I do feel like I've heard some people say that it has opened up, their eyes to something maybe they didn't see before, be it something with the antagonist or be it, with the way flight attendants are viewed, and that people didn't quite realize what responsibilities and abilities that flight attendants have, and that it's increased their respect for flight attendants. And I think reactions like that, I don't know, that's the kind of art I want to create. And I think that's the kind of art that I want to consume, is something that expands my horizon and maybe makes me stop and think about a different perspective and approach it with understanding and compassion that I might not have had before.
Yeah. And I loved how you kind of interwove a little bit of humor in that. I think there was like a line where, it's not just my job to serve you snacks and water or something like that. And I was, again, as a frequent flyer, I think about that all the time. And, I feel like sometimes when you have people that don't fly quite as much, they're not necessarily in tune with all the other aspects of why you're really there, and so I kind of loved that line that you threw in there. So before I get to the movie question, yeah, it was definitely, Diane says it was definitely a great glimpse into the pressures of being a flight attendant beyond the peanuts and soda. Okay. A couple people want to know this answer. Is it really true that there's only 12 minutes of oxygen for passengers?
Yes, that is absolutely, absolutely true. But it shouldn't worry you because the oxygen is not on board to be there for a sustained flight. In 12 minutes, the pilots are going to be able to descend the plane. It's just an emergency supply of air so that the pilots can then descend the plane low enough that you can breathe without oxygen at all. That's all it is. It's a stopgap. So truly, it is a fact. Yes, that is absolutely true, but it shouldn't worry you. Like I said, 12 minutes is ample time to get to breathable air.
Excellent answer. That makes me feel good. Everybody feel good about that? Okay. All right. So, I mean, yes, everyone's saying thank you. Makes them feel better. All right. So obviously this movie screams adaptation to a screenplay. Do you have anything to share on that front? Are there any plans in the works?
I don't. I mean, the movie rights, yes, were picked up by Universal. And all I can say, because I'm contractually bound to not say much, but I can say that it is moving forward. It is moving forward. And there's a lot that I'm not even privy to and a lot that goes on. And these things, if there's anything I've learned, over the course of publishing my first book and getting a movie deal, which is just insane to begin with, is that I don't know anything about how any of it works. So I'm learning as every day goes on that it's just like, boy, this is a big process and one that I'm not sort of privy to a lot of what happens. So.
Yes. Well, having talked to over 30 authors this past year, you are not alone in saying that.
Exactly.
It is a long process and sometimes makes it and sometimes doesn't. So, but we always ask this question too of our authors, like, do you envision any specific actors in any of the key roles? For me, I'll throw it out there. My Captain Bill, I kind of envisioned Matt Damon. But did you ever do that?
It's so funny because I love hearing what other people think. And it's such a fun thing to be like I've had some people throw out different, actors for different characters. And I'll say, seriously, like what in the way I wrote that made that? It's like a fascinating, like Rorschach test that I feel like says about like my writing and the reader. It's interesting. But to answer your question, I didn't like cast the movie in my mind as I was writing it. I think because like my only goal in this process, well, my first goal was to finish the book. That was it. I just wanted to finish writing this story. And I didn't tell anybody I was writing this book. Like no one in my life knew that I was working on this book. Nobody knew that this was happening. And I just did it for myself. And I just wanted to see if I could finish a story. And once I did, and I realized like, okay, I did it. I told a complete story. And I think it's actually kind of an interesting story. And I think if I worked really hard, maybe it might be a story that people want to read. So then my next goal was just make it better. And so I worked tirelessly to make it as good as I felt I could take it. And then my final goal was get it published, like see if you can get it published. And that's when I started looking for an agent and doing all that. So like, that's the extent of my dreaming. Like it was small and incremental and it stopped at just get it published. I wanted my book, I wanted to be able to hold it in my hand and say, I wrote this. That was it. So this idea of like a movie just was so far surpassed my wildest dreams that no, I didn't cast this ahead of time because it just never entered my mind that actual actors would be playing these parts. So no.
Awesome. Well, we'll just anxiously await to see who Universal casts then, right?
Exactly. And I'll be interested too, it's funny too when people ask me now, like, well, who would you cast now that it is, you do have a movie deal? It's like, it's really a hard question for me to answer because it feels almost like asking a mother, like, well, what would your child be like if it wasn't like this child that you have? You know what I mean? It's like, they're my babies, they're my children. So it's hard to think of like Bill not being, the Bill that I have envisioned, which is just like a fictitious character.
Yeah, for sure. So funny. Someone envisioned Pilot Pete. That's funny. Okay, so with Falling still having such great success, it seems kind of premature to ask this question, but what's next? You have something in the works?
I am. I'm working, I was working right before this. I'm gonna eat dinner after this and go right back to editing my next book. I'm working, it was a 2-book deal. And so I am just working tirelessly on my next book. And I'm being just as tight-lipped about this one as I was about Falling. Like I said, nobody knew I was even writing Falling. And when it sort of like kept snowballing, it was sort of like on a need to know basis. Like people kept coming into the loop, but only on need to know. So like very few people in my life knew that I'd even done this. So then when the announcement went public that like I had a book deal and it was a big book deal and now it was a movie deal, like I had so many friends and family that were like writing and texting and calling and being like, oh my God, this is amazing. Congratulations. We're so proud of you. But you wrote a book? Like, I don't get it. Like nobody knew. It was a very sort of out of left field type thing. So I've tried to recreate that by just not telling people what my next book is even about.
Okay, so we'll be on the edge of our seats just like we were for Falling. All right, but you have to promise to come back and talk about it.
Deal, done.
Okay.
Put it on the calendar. It's done. I will say though that it will revolve around aviation. Because you don't work in aviation for a decade and like exhaust all of your material in one book. It's just a world where the material is ripe. So it will involve planes. I will say that. Okay.
When can we expect it?
2022. That's this year. Boy, we're in this year. I just realized. Happy New Year, everybody. Yeah. This year. Yeah. Which isn't stressful at all.
Okay. Awesome. Are you still an active flight attendant?
I am not. No, once I got the book contract, I went ahead and hung up my wings. So yes, I am not.
Well, congratulations.
Yeah. Decade. It was a good run. It was a good run. And you know what? There's some things I don't miss. But most of it I do. I do miss it. It was a great job. I loved being a flight attendant. I mean, I loved it so much I wrote a book about how much I love and respect the industry and the job. So yeah,
that's awesome. All right. So we always kind of like to wrap our chats asking our authors what you're currently reading and recommending, and then we'll of course share that with the group afterwards. So anything you're loving right now?
I am currently reading a thriller called The Second Life of Nick Mason by Steve Hamilton. I don't know the year it came out. It came out a few years ago, but it's fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. And I'm sort of, I try to read sort of what mode that I want to be in mentally. I'm very much like affected by the stuff that I read, it'd be like becomes my world. So since that's kind of where I'm at right now, a thriller mindset, that's what I'm reading. So that's great. I had finished just before that. The last sort of great book that I read was very different though. Damnation Spring by Ash Davidson came out earlier this year. And I read that actually once the craziness of publication from Falling had kind of settled. I read that and it was it's a story set in Northern California in the 70s, involving the logging industry. It's not, is it a book you've done here with the club?
No,
Okay.
but it's on my to be read list. Yeah, it looks fantastic.
I just can't speak highly enough of it. It literally, when I read it, lowered my blood pressure and made me read and think slower. It's just, it's the prose and the plot are both just delicious, and it's slow. It's a slow burn, and it's just, it takes place in the 70s, but it feels very timely to now. And I feel like I'm gushing a lot, but it's a wonderful book, a really, really wonderful book.
Awesome. Perfect.
Yeah.
Anything else?
I'm currently, my audio listen that I'm doing right now is, because I would imagine with Peloton, I bet a lot of you guys do audio books.
Yeah, a lot of people do scenic rides, or audio is definitely very big in the group, and or people doing chores around their house or on their commute, or taking their walk, or whatever. Audio is definitely a big vehicle in the group for sure.
Yeah, well, I didn't get into audiobooks until kind of like 2020, once everybody kind of went inside, is really when I first got into audiobooks for the first time. And I'm listening now to, The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. Yeah, which is just, it's my first that I've read of hers, and she just puts out hit after hit after hit, and her following are just, they're huge, and they just love it. So I was like, well, I need to see what this is about. And I'm probably a third of the way in, and I have figured out what it is about. It's fantastic. So if you're new to the party like I am, big recommend, because I'm loving it. I can't wait to read the rest.
Yeah, we chatted with Taylor this summer, which was really fun. Yeah. She's a kind of screenwriter background, so she's an interesting person to chat with. So
yeah. And I think several of her stuff is like currently in works of shooting is like full steam ahead.
Yeah, but as she said, it's taken a long time. But yes, she has, I think there's like 4 things in the works. So yeah.
Good for her.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. This was fantastic. And where can we find you or follow you on your socials? Are you on Instagram and Facebook or Twitter?
I'm on Instagram and I'm on Twitter. On Instagram, I'm at TJ_author, I believe. And Twitter, I think, is T_J_Newman author. Let me look that up real fast. You can put in the show notes or something. It's so funny. Yeah. I don't actually say my handle. At T_J_Newman is Twitter. And then let me double check Instagram. It is TJ_author.
So no Newman for Instagram, everybody. I think I already followed.
Correct. Yeah. Just TJ_author for Instagram.
Awesome. Well, happy editing, and we will definitely circle back and look forward to whatever's coming later this year. And so excited about your success, and we will definitely continue to recommend Falling to the group and to all our friends and family. So thank you so much, and Happy New Year.
Well, thank you so much. This has really been really fun, and thank you for reading. Thank you for coming on here. Right on, and Happy New Year. Maybe by next year, maybe I'll have a Peloton by then.
Exactly.
Yeah, maybe I'll be able to join the club, and I'll be rewriting.
Oh, you can join the club. Don't you worry. You're invited. You're a full-fledged member now. Don't worry. Just if you want to join, request to join. Tons of great book recommendations.
Love it, and good conversation. So I have to join up.
All right. Have a great night.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, everybody. Happy New Year.
Bye, everybody.